Tonight we have meat animal carcass judging with Dr. Sam Garcia. He is going to join us. He is at the U of A Food Products and Safety Lab, which back in my day when I was a student, we just called it the Meat Lab, but it's got a fancier name now. And then our 4-H agent from Greenlee County, who you guys have seen on many of these webinars, Ashley Jefford Sample, is going to talk to us about the opportunities in 4-H as well. Kenzie and Emmeline, glad you're here too. And of course, we'll just do the normal thing here. You guys know the name of the game. Okay, good. I see that Sam's coming on here. So we have all participants other than our presenters are muted. And since it's learning experience, all that, you have the two options, either the question and answer box. If you're just being asked something from your speakers, you can put those answers in the chat. And then if you want to ask a question of the speaker, then you would put that in the Q&A box. And of course, it may or may not get answered right away, just depending on the situation. So of course, polite and respectful in the chat. We will have the recording available later. And of course, if anyone's harassing anyone or whatever, that includes you too, Sam.
All people.
And then we just will remove you from that. We have not had to do that, so that's good. Okay, so we have about 8 people coming on here, and Ashley Wright has just put in the link to the evaluation. She'll put that in towards the end too. We have lots of people. We have several that have earned the shirts, and we have a bunch, like another 12 that are can earn them with one more. And I think some of you are on here. Kaylee, you have either 1 or 2 more to attend. I see that you were registered for them, so you should be earning your shirt. 5 live, and it will be yours. So you'll be getting an email from Debbie Reed, most likely looking for sizes. So with that, I'm going to stop share. And Sam, you ready to share your slides?
Yeah.
Okay, so again, we have Dr. Sam Garcia from Food Products Safety Lab, Meat Animal Carcass Judging.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a great afternoon. So what age kids are these, Betsy?
So we have everything from 12-year-old to adult. We have some volunteers and things like that as well. But Josephine Hunt has been on every single one of these, and she is, I think, a junior 4-H'er. And so we have Kaylee is also a 4-H'er. So we have lots of variety, but young to old.
Okay, very nice. All right, so this morning I actually did a carcass contest for Pima County Fair, so that was pretty fun. We showed the kids, and they only have pork for their contest, but today we're going to talk about beef, pork, and lamb, and I'm just going to kind of go over what we look at when we're judging carcasses. Okay, so if my internet's a little crazy or you can't hear me, please let us know. I'm at a ranch right now, so hopefully you can hear us. Okay, so what do we look for in beef? Right, we obviously want the most quality, and that's for all the species. We want really high quality, and we want to have a lot of it. So sometimes we can talk about quality versus quantity. Quality means, for example, when you go to the store and you find prime, select, choice, standard, different quality grades. So the best one would be prime, and we'll look at it. And the worst would be something like commercial utility or something like that. But we'll talk about those here in a second. Right. So when we are looking at beef carcasses, we'll look at maturity. So how old that animal is. That's really important because we will know that maturity, depending on how old the animal is, the tougher the meat, and also the different color and the texture of it changes over time. All right. And we look at marbling. So how much intramuscular fat there is in that animal. If we have a good amount of fat, that means that that animal or that carcass is going to eat well. Okay. We look at the color, and the color is more for selling purposes. If the color is a good in beef, cherry pink is what we are looking for. Someone looks at it and says, well, this is a good piece of meat. But if it's an off color, they might think that it's not that good, so it doesn't sell that well. Okay. And we look at how firm it is. If it's really firm, really tough, then that's not a good thing, but it's also not a good thing if it's soft or mushy. Okay. And the texture of it is to have small, fine fibers or really thick pieces. All right. So how do we look at maturity? If we do not have the age of the animal on the like to verify it, we can look at maturity by looking at the bones. So we can say, for example, that an older animal will have all this fused here. Okay, the bones here will no longer be separated. The sacral vertebrae, which are right here, will all be fused. All right, so we look at the physiological age of the animal to determine how old it is. We look at this, we need to see if there's a lot of bone in here or if there's a lot of cartilage still left. Obviously, the more cartilage there is throughout the carcass, that means that the younger animal. The older the animal, the less cartilage, and the shape of the bones and the color of them also change. Okay, meat color tends to intensify and get darker with the age of the animal also. Okay. Okay, it's fun. It makes fun. So the sacral vertebrae, that's what I was mentioning earlier. So an animal that is young, you can see a separation in the vertebrae there, right here, and continuing down the line. But an older animal, you no longer have that separation. You just have a big, thick piece of bone where all these pieces here actually fuse together to make one big bone. Okay. So a younger animal would be, 9 to 30 months. 30 to 42, we always see it's a medium. So we can call this maturity A, then B, C, D, and E. The older the animal gets, the more fused and the less chance to see any separation here. And that continues on down the line. Okay. All right, so here's a good example to looking at maturity. And we can see that by looking at the sacral vertebrae here. So, sorry, let me go back. So this here, for example, would be A to a C maturity. And you can see separation in the cartilage here. And as we go further along this way, everything starts becoming more fused and the color of the bones change. Here we can see that the cartilage is pretty white cartilage. And over here, you can see that we start having this area here, for example, that's already turning into bone. All right. So the older the animal, the color of the bone will change and it will become harder, what we call hard bone.
Hey, Sam, we got a quick question while you're on there. Is there, when you go into the store and buy a cut, do you see this? Do you say, oh, I need to judge it by the maturity of the bone?
No, because this is to judge a carcass, right? If you're going to the store and buying a cut, for the most part, if it has a quality grade of prime, choice, select, those are going to be animals that are young, A maturity. They're going to be animals that fall right here between 9 and 30 months of age. Okay. So for the most part, if you see that, you're going to know that it's a young animal. If it's an older animal, sometimes it's sold in stores that don't really have a high reputation, that let's say will tend to sell cheaper meat, or like truck stops, like steaks that don't really make the prime or choice. They might be sold at a truck stop where someone just stops and eats a steak for you find a steak for $7, and that's kind of rare, right? Or you're in Vegas and it's like $7 steak, come and eat all you want, that kind of thing. So most likely you're not going to find that online.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So here, for example, are different colors. We want this cherry pink color. If it gets, sorry, here, let me go back. If it gets too, I don't have the 6, I don't know why. Oh, sorry. So if it gets too dark right here, this is a bad deal, because if you look at it again at the store, it won't look very good. So most people will not want this. So we prefer a color that's bright cherry, right? If for whatever reason you have an off color, your quality grade will go down. And it depends on how bad it is. Okay. So if you're judging a carcass, the darker the meat, the worse it is. You want this cherry pink color. All right. So here's where you can see, kind of understand the age of the animal and the marbling. So with age of the animal, 9 to 30 months, and we'll just talk about these two for example. 9 to 30 months is an A maturity. 30 to 42 is a B maturity. So you can see here that if you are over 42, if that animal was over 42, you cannot have the quality grade of choice or prime or even standard. Okay. So a young animal can have these grades here. A little slightly older animal will have this ones. And as you get this way, you no longer have the option of having a prime, choice, or select. Does then everyone understand that?
So put in the chat if this makes sense. Okay, so Josephine, yes. Kenzie, yes. So basically that stuff without any color is hamburger, right?
Well, a lot of it could be hamburger, but a lot of it could go into it. Like I said, steak places that are kind of on the cheaper side.
Okay.
You can still use. Actually, if you are making like a roast, the meat that comes from these older animals tend to make better roast just because they have more connective tissue that'll dissolve and give you a good texture. Where
Okay.
something that's very young here and you roast it, sometimes you end up with something that's too soft, too mushy, right? So these actually make pretty good roast, like especially in the crock pot type.
Okay. Now, one quick question somebody had put in. What about grass-fed beef that's usually older since they take longer to finish? Are they graded on this same scale?
Yes, they are graded on the same scale. If you're grading grass-fed, they will be graded on the same scale. Now, that's something that us as a university or other places could work on for research, a research project where we can look at and kind of determine quality grades for grass-fed, which might be a little bit different, right? Because they don't tend to have all that marbling, or they don't finish in time to actually have a good age for that. So there should be a different scale for it, but right now there's not. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions in the chat? Let's see. Nope. Okay. All right. So moving along. All right. So we want to, if we're looking at these, we need to figure out what the marbling is of that animal. And starting down here, it's devoid, meaning practically nothing. There's no marbling. So everyone understands marbling. Marbling is the little white specks. I'm just going to go back so I can show you what marbling is. These little specks of fat here, there, all this white in that muscle, that means marbling. So the more of that we have, the better the quality grade. Okay. So abundant would be a high prime. Choice would be from small to moderate. Slight would be select. That's the only one that you have there. And then these three down here would be standard. Okay. Again, the more you have, the better the quality grade of that meat. That means that for every time that you eat a prime piece of meat, 1 out of 33 times you're not going to like it, but 32 times you're going to like a prime piece of meat. Where if you go down to select, it's like 1 out of 4 times. So this is what the meat looks like for a prime versus a choice down here. You can see the marbling a lot better here, a lot more of it, and the choice minus, very little. We're talking about quality right now. We're not talking about quantity. Once you look into quantity, this one might provide more meat and less waste. But in this case, we're just looking at this part. Okay. So here's what we standard, pretty much nothing there, and select. Okay. We don't eat a lot of meat like this in the US just because we prefer the fattier kind. Now, yield grade is one thing that it's a little hard to understand the whole thing, but the idea is that you have a number between 1 and 5, 1 being the best and 5 being the worst. 1 being an animal that produces a lot of meat, and 5 being one that's producing a lot of waste fat. It might still produce a lot of meat, but it has a lot of waste. So if we go back here, this one here would be a yield grade 1, but this one over here is more like a yield grade 3 or 4. Okay, so this one is not so good in terms of yield. This one's better in yield. So we measure different things to look at that, to get that. We look at the ribeye, how much fat there is right about here. We look at the ribeye area, and we also see how much kidney, pelvic, and heart fat is we have around the internal organs of that animal. Okay, so one way to estimate that, if you don't have a chart, you can just kind of go take this measurement and this measurement, multiply. That'll give you an idea of what the ribeye area of that animal is. Okay, the bigger the ribeye area, the better the yield grade. The bigger the ribeye area, the more muscle you're going to have, the more meat you're going to get out of that animal. Okay, but let's say this is I had for a contest. But if you're in a contest, now sometimes you don't want to stray too much. The average for the United States is a 3. If you're in a contest and you don't know what to pick, just pick a 3. Okay. This here just gives you an idea if you're estimating yield grade. That's when you have a lot more knowledge of how it works. But for example, if you have a back fat of 0.3 and the square inch ribeye of 12, you can estimate that to be a 2.75 minus the 0.3 for the what do you call it, for the
Back fat.
back fat, I'm sorry. And you end up with that right there. So you have to kind of practice looking at these quite often to understand them. This here is like a little cheat sheet here. If you have a back fat of 0.4, you're going to end up with a 3 yield grade. If you have a back fat of 0.5, you're going to end up with a 3.225. So quality and yield grade don't go hand in hand. So from what you've seen so far, what do you think, and you can write it in the chat, what do you think is the best combination for yield and quality? Which is the best quality grade and which was the best yield grade? That's what I want to see. See if you know that combination. Remember, yield grade is 1 through 5. Quality is, let's just go from standard to prime.
So what you're asking them from these numbers here?
No, from the yield grade numbers. Remember I said 1 is the best,
Okay.
5 is the worst.
Okay, what do you think, people?
What would be the best combination?
Okay, Christy, Kaylee, Kenzie, Josephine, don't be shy tonight. Okay, I got a 0.1 best and 1.2. Got a prime yield grade, prime and yield grade 2. Got a 0.7. I got 0.1. We're all over the charts there, Sam.
Okay, so yield grade. I'm gonna skip this portion right here.
0.1 is the best, is our last answer.
Yeah, so the best yield grade is 1, and the best marbling is. There's a slide that didn't come in. Okay, the best yield grade is 1, and the best quality grade would be prime. So Josephine has the best answer so far. Prime yield grade 2. Well, the prime yield grade 1 is better, but she has a good point here. If you have a prime yield grade 2, you're doing a good job racing that animal. All right, do you have any questions so far?
So far, we don't have any in the question box that we didn't answer already.
Do you have anything that I am not answering? I thought I saw something here before I asked that question.
Let's see. You answered the one about the beef, the grass-fed beef. That was
I guess
the one in the Q&A
marbling
box.
gives the flavor. So marbling, the amount of fat that you have in that animal tends to give you a better flavor. More fat, but more flavor, and that's yes. So marbling will give you quite a bit of flavor, unless you don't like fat. So, all right. So this is estimating ribeye area and all. Do you have any questions about meats? You guys had a question earlier about grass fed, or if you go to the grocery store. So, if you have any more questions about that before we move on to pork.
So let's see. So on the grocery store one, so you're saying what you've just told us is the difference with, different fat that's within the muscle and also outside the muscle. You talked about the colors and things. When you go to the grocery store, and is there, like, how sometimes when you get home and you open up the steak, it's a little bit browner on one side than the other? Does that mean that it was old, or what's the deal with that?
Well, that just means that one area of that meat. Well, it depends what kind of brown it is, but if it's just discolored, it just might mean that you ended up with a piece of meat that hasn't seen oxygen for a while.
Okay.
Once you open it up and let it sit for a while, that oxygen should attach to that muscle, and it'll make it really bright
Okay.
color. It doesn't mean that it's old. It just means the way it's at. And a little brown is not bad. I'm really brown, and I'm pretty good too. So
Okay. Hey, we got another question for you. Does yield grade affect the grocery store experience, or is that really just relevant for the producer processor for money's profits?
So that's most for the producer and processor. If you go to the grocery store, you're not going to see the yield grade put on there, because most of what you care when you go to the grocery store is if it's going to eat well, and that is more related to quality. The yield is more related to the grocery store and to the producer. So if a grocery store buys a piece of meat that has a really good yield, that means that they're not going to have to trim too much fat. They're not going to have a lot of waste.
Okay. Good. Oh, we got another one. What's your best tip for picking out good steaks that don't break the bank?
Well, the idea is to look for marbling. So you want to make sure they have those nice pieces of fat in there. Now, you want to look for steaks that are pieces of meat that are not used in that animal too much. And you can see if it's been aged or not. For example, a good chuck steak, you can have a chuck steak that's really good. If it's vacuum sealed and you can let it sit in your fridge for a couple of weeks, it'll tenderize quite a bit. So maybe that won't break your bank. That's $5 versus a ribeye that's 15, and it'll have all that flavor. So if you see a manager special at the grocery store, if you're gonna cook that steak that night, I would go ahead and buy those. A lot of people don't because they're afraid it's bad. But if you see a manager special, hey, that piece of meat, it's good. It's just it's been sitting there and might hit the expiration, or what they call expiration date, sooner. So those are pretty good. Any meat that's a little discolored, like you say, Betsy, you can actually find a marinade and marinate it overnight in something that will kind of help you with that color, and also help you if it has a little bit, if it's a little bit older, it'll help you with that flavor too. So that's a good way of doing it.
Okay. Well, and it also, if you're going to look for a cheaper meat, then it makes a difference on how you decide to cook it. Like you said, you can actually tenderize stuff cooking long and slow, as opposed to the perfect steak you're not going to get for next to nothing.
Right. So that's a different, if you're wanting for a cheaper piece of meat, and the question was steak, that's why I focused on steak. But if you're looking for a cheaper meal option, you can do a roast, or you can do a shank, or you can do those, like top round, bottom round. Those pieces of meat are actually cheaper. They're a little bit tougher, but if you know how to cook them, they come out really, really good.
Excellent. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. So looking at pork. So when we're looking at pork, we do very similar things for pork and beef. And we are looking at the color of that animal. Now, the reason we look at color more in the pork is because if you end up with something that's pale, kind of on the whitish side, like this here, you might have a pork that has that porcine stress syndrome, right? Or a pig that you're going to end up with meat that's not so tasty. So we want that color to be reddish pink, firm, and non-exudative, meaning not watery. Okay. So we want that meat. We prefer obviously the more marbling, but it's hard to have pork with tons of marbling. Okay. So if we can have this color right here, that's perfect. Okay. And marbling, obviously, we want more, but it is hard to get it in pork. Fair question. Is the stress how you get dark color cattle? Yep. If you have short-term stress, you're gonna end up with pale meat. If you have longer-term stress, you're gonna have the darker meat in cattle, dark cutters, and that happens because the pH doesn't hit the normal level. So for a dark cutter, you end up with a pH that's higher than what we want. With a cutter, the PSE, you end up with a pH that's lower than what we want, and really fast. It drops really fast. The reason stress causes that different color, it's because we need that lactic acid to hit that pH, the perfect pH, and go through rigor mortis of that. But if you stress that animal uses up all that glycogen, all that stored sugars in the muscle. And by the time you kill it, it doesn't have it enough to actually drop that pH. So that's why we end up with a dark cutter.
So when they say that pork is the other white meat, you actually don't want it to be white. You just want it to be lighter pink, like your 3.
Yeah. And what they mean by white meat, they're trying to advertise pork as the other chicken, kind of more healthier option to beef. I guess that's what they're trying to say there. Okay. So, all right. So we look at hogs, very similar. There's hog carcass grades, to see if they have muscling or not. Most of the pigs that we see now are going to be over here thick. They have a lot of muscle. You don't see this type of pig here anymore, unless you find them like at a someone who's raising breed, like a heritage breed or something like that, that doesn't focus on muscling. Okay. So we measure again how much fat it has on the back. We measure how big that loin area is for that pig. And we can also put all that information into a spreadsheet that gives us an idea of how much muscle there is in that animal. So here, for example, you can see this little piggy here. There's a thick piece of fat. This one doesn't have so much. This one doesn't have so much. So yield-wise, the one that's going to have more meat, it's going to be this one versus this one, because this one has a lot of waste fat. And at one point in the US, we were using a lot of fat, but not anymore. So we don't want that. Okay. So unribbed carcasses, if you're looking at a carcass and you cannot see how much meat there is there, you can get an estimate of how fat that animal is by looking at the fat found right here. So in the first rib, last rib, and the lumbar. And also you can see the length of the pig will become important. The longer the pig, obviously the more pork chops and all bacon and all that you're going to have. So it's a different way if you're judging a carcass that's ribbed versus one that's not. Muscling is important. Like I said, you're not going to have a lot of pigs that have muscle score of 1 or 2. Most of the pigs that we raised here and in big operations are muscle score of 3. Ooh, wow, that was fast. Any questions about pork? because I only have 35 minutes and I'm already at 31 here. So
Oh, you've got time. We just put that as a guidance, so you're okay.
I don't know how much time my computer has, but anyways, any questions about pork?
Our people that are usually asking all kinds of questions are kind of shy tonight.
Yeah, that happens with meat. And I'm not sure why. Okay. So now when we look at lamb carcass grading, it's very similar. We look at quantity and quality. And we want to make sure that animal is a young animal versus an older. Especially in lamb is important because the older animals tend to have an off flavor to them. So that's where you get mutton and other, you get that mutton flavor the flavor that no one really likes, right? So to look at a carcass for the maturity of a lamb, we can look at what we call a break joint. A young lamb will have, oh, I went too far. A young lamb will have a joint right here that looks like this, where a older lamb will have one that looks like this. At this point, here's where that break joint was, but because it's older, it fused and you can no longer break it there. So we look at the break joint. We also look at the ribs. A rib that looks red like this, it's a younger animal. It means that there's still blood supply to the bone because it's still growing. An animal that has the ribs that are flat like this, it's an older animal, and they're whiter in color. You can see because they don't longer have that blood supply. Okay. The color of the meat also changes to a darker color. Now, when we look at the quality, we don't need to cut into the lamb. Ooh, my battery's running low. We don't need to cut into the lamb. We actually just look at streaking. So here, for example, we don't see a lot of streaking, a lot of fat coming up this way. But if you look at the moderate, you can see the fat, how it goes here. All these are streaks. These are streaks. So this one actually comes up higher right here. You can see that this one covers a whole bunch right here plus all that. So that's going to be a better quality than the other one. Okay. And we have a chart very similar to what we have in beef. So a young lamb will be right here, an older lamb over here. Anything that is doesn't have the joint anymore, that break joint. If we has one joint and one break joint and one spool joint, it'll be right here. If you no longer have the break joints, it goes into mutton. That's a different flavor, like I was saying. We look at how much degree of flank streaking there is and the age. Very similar to the cattle grade. Okay. We also look at how much fat they have in here. If they have too much waist fat, we do not consider them as a really good lamb. So we actually discount in price for those. All right. We also look at the belly wall. If it's a really thick belly wall, usually that means there's a lot of fat. So we don't want a really fat one like this. We prefer one that's not so thick. You can see there's not much waist fat here. And if you look at the marbling, in this case, they have these ribs, you can see that this one versus this one, there's not a whole bunch of difference in the amount of marbling, yet this one has a whole bunch of waste. Okay. We want to consider how these lambs are put together and how much fat they have around here and here. Again, all this is going to be waist fat, so we don't want those really fatty lambs. Okay, most lambs, it takes a really sorry lamb, one that's really skinny, to grade anything less than choice. So most of the time you end up with choice or prime carcasses. I think most of them actually end up in prime, as long as they have any type of fat cover. Ooh, and that's it. That was a really fast lecture. And I have 14 minutes left on my battery for my computer and my
Well,
charger.
you got some questions in there, so let's hit those before your computer dies.
Yeah, let's do this.
So
All
what do you
right.
think is better, pork, beef in marbling and color?
What do I think it's better? I am a beef guy, so beef is better in every single way. Um, but you can't beat a good bacon, right? And really, beef doesn't make that great of a bacon. So
Okay.
I think pork, beef is over pork every single time.
Okay.
For advice and resources, I'm looking to get better at judging carcasses. Judging carcasses is a lot of practice. So you actually have to see them and see them and see them and see them for a long time to actually understand which one's better than another. But advise, look at marbling and look at waist fat. An animal that has a really good marbling plus waist fat, and we're talking about beef here, waist fat that's minimal, that's usually going to be your top one. So always look at marbling, make sure that it has plenty, right? That's one of the things that gives you the most value in beef. In pork, you want to see how much muscle there is. And again, it has to have enough fat, but not too wasty. What is the easiest species to learn to judge? I think you're going to learn to judge the ones that you like the most. It's not the same for every person. I really like beef, so I really love the beef judging.
Uh-oh. Well, it looks like we lost his battery. So I don't know if he can plug in, but in case he can't come back, we'll go ahead and move to Ashley Jeffer Sample with the 4-H part. Oh, he's coming back. Maybe he plugged in.
I'll wait then. And I can get the last question in there.
Okay, if you want to touch on that real quick, you can.
No, I can wait.
Okay. Did you plug in?
Oh, I have my phone.
Oh. Can you see the questions?
I cannot see the questions. Would you read
Okay,
them?
so at what age would a lamb have the most fat, or does it just depend on the lamb?
Well, it'll depend on the lamb and the degree of finish. So if you're overfeeding that lamb, you can have a pretty young lamb that's really fat. So it also depends on genetics. So for example, the white-faced lamb will tend to put on more fat than the black-faced lamb. So you don't want to have a ton of fat on lamb.
Okay. Because a lot
Because
of that lamb fat would be extra fat, right? The waist fat rather than marbling.
Right. And a lot of people don't like the lamb fat taste. So we don't want to have a lot of it because it'll not sell that well.
Okay. And then we have, does that extra lamb fat affect the eating quality, which you just addressed? I know it discounts the carcass. So can you purchase that cheaper and still get a really nice piece of lamb?
Well, you could purchase it cheaper, but there are people who do like it. Now, I'm not saying majority of the people don't, but I think there's not enough lamb production in the United States to drop that price where you're going to have a lot of sales on lamb. Most of the people will pay a good amount for lamb pieces.
Okay. And then if you guys have other questions, get those in that Q&A box while he's on the phone here. There was one that we have, and Ashley Jeffer Sample said she could also touch on it. But will there be any carcass judging opportunities at the state level? So she'll get into that with the 4-H. Sam, do you do stuff, carcass judging trainings or anything like that at times?
We do. We provide also short courses if someone wanted to come in with a group, and we actually have a few lambs there or beef or whatever, and we can actually work on those. So yes, we can provide opportunities to look at actual carcasses. We just need to be in contact and kind of schedule a day for that.
Okay. So here's a question. Do you want to hang on your phone and let Ashley do her 4-H, or do you want to just do a last call for questions since you're on your phone because your computer died?
Well, I'm not just on my phone, but I'm at a ranch and I have to go back to looking at some cattle before it gets dark.
Okay. So last call for Dr. Sam Garcia. Okay, here we go. Do you know if beef, pork, or lamb meat quality is good by looking at the animal that has not been culled or maybe killed?
Killed. So yes, you
It
can
says culled, but
determine.
I think live animal is what she meant.
You can determine the quality of the animal by the degree of finish. Okay, so if we're looking at a beef animal, we know that we need to have a certain amount of fat for that animal to have good quality. So we look at what we call body condition score, right? And we look to see if there's deposits of fat around the brisket, around the tail head, or on the flank. If there are there, then that gives us an idea that that lamb is going to be choice or prime, for example, if it has good amounts. But if you can see bones, if you can see not a lot of fat cover, then that gives you an idea that that animal's not going to have good quality. And that goes the same for pork and for lamb also.
Okay. Any last questions for Sam tonight? I think that was really informative. I learned a lot.
Yeah, so
I
did
don't know. I went too fast.
No, I learned a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, last call for questions.
So I have a question for Ashley. How does it feel not to have to stage Jeffer sample? You just say Mangus now.
I know. Yeah, it's definitely different. And Ben says hi.
Oh, tell him hi too. I'm in Douglas at this big ranch here. So, anyways, that's what I was doing.
All right. Well, we've got a thank you so much in the chat for you. And certainly we are very glad you joined us and gave us some great information. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you. Thank you. And sorry for my computer dying. They left my charger in the office. So
Oops.
after we eat in the morning. Yeah. So I was trying to get through that presentation fairly fast. That way, if I need it, I know I can get on the phone, but not on the computer. So, all right. Thank you for having me, and you guys have a great night.
All right.
Thanks,
Thanks, Sam.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. And now we have Ashley Jeff for sample or Mingus.
Yeah, I go by either one. So now I'm going to talk about the 4-H aspect of the Carcass Contest. So telling you kind of what we offer now in a county program. So if you live in that county, or if maybe you want to bring it to your county, these are some great ways to do that. And then talking about contests that we do have available. So first and foremost, this just shows you that the meat judging has been around for a while. Before Dr. Garcia was there was Dr. Marcello. And so this is just showing you kind of a picture of the history of meat judging at the U of A, but there's Dr. Garcia. So this is, like Sam said, it's the science behind the hide. What a lot of people like to talk about is kind of the livestock show in the ring is kind of like the beauty pageant of everything. It's really beautified and you don't really get to see the things that are underneath. And that's what the carcass judging does, is it's underneath, it's the science about it. It's what the industry is doing. So county carcass contests are available in some of our counties. And what that is they judge market animals on the rail at a meat processing plant, like Sam does for some of our counties. And it's a great way to evaluate your exercise and feeding programs that you've had your animals on. And it's judged and graded according to the USDA and industry standards. So again, it's a really great way if you're interested in going into the industry with the species that you show. Meat is our driving force. What are we selling our animals for to be consumed? So this is a great way to introduce yourself to the industry and to see what the trends are. And then some examples of counties that already have some great carcass programs are Mojave County Carcass Contest. So their animals are taken to the U of A meat lab. The showman gets to go down to the U of A meat lab, evaluate everything on the rail, and then an animal of each species is awarded the Carcass Grand Champion. So that's a really neat contest. And then there's 2 other examples that I'm going to talk about a little bit more in depth. And the first one is the swine carcass in Pima County, which Sam just hit on, that he just recently judged. And I think this is a really neat project. So if we have any volunteers or parents or even participants that are interested in learning more about this, just reach out to me. But the way this contest works is you enter into the contest with $25. And then I give you a little few more details in here, but I'm really just going to hit on the main points. Your swine is going to go to the U of A meat lab so it can be judged with every other market swine that's in this class. And then what they're going to be what's going to be done here is they're going to be co-signed to the packer. So it's not going to go through a fair sale. You're going to sell this just like you would in production. It's going to go straight to the packer, and the packer's going to buy it at packer price. And so then there's two components to this contest in Pima County. You're going to show your carcass swine animal in the show ring live, and it's going to be judged live there in the ring. And then all of the swine will be sent over to the U of A meat lab where they will be processed, and you'll head on over to the U of A meat lab where they will be judged on the rail. So their carcass will be judged. So it's really neat because there's a live component and a carcass component, and it gives you an idea to see how much similarities there are, and really gets to show if the judge was able to see it right there on the hoof, if they were able to determine which hog was going to hang the best carcass. And then of that money that you paid to enter this class is then divided based on the following percentages. So like 25% of the pot goes to the person who gets first in the carcass, and 25% goes to the person who gets first in live. And it's just a really neat class that's different from a lot of your traditional livestock classes available at fair. And then again, it is judged based on National Pork Producers criteria. And Sam talked a little bit about this, but here in bold is really the only thing you need to concentrate on. But you're judged on how much your hot carcass weighed, how long your carcass was, the average back fat thickness, the loin eye area, color score, marbling, firmness. These are all things that we just heard Sam talk about. So again, and I know I'm going to say this a lot, but I think that it's the key takeaway is that it reflects a lot of what the industry is doing, because this is what swine producers are selling their hogs at. This is what matters to them. So it really gets you to start thinking about those trends beyond just the show ring. So another example is the production steer project in Yuma County. And so all production steers are purchased from one feedlot. And so the thing about this is, as you can see with this picture, is that production cattle and show cattle, there's a lot of differences. And so again, this is a really neat opportunity for you to get involved in the cattle industry beyond just showing. So you get a production steer, and everybody in this project gets a steer from the same feedlot. So you're using those same genetics. So it's kind of an even playing field. And this concentrates a lot on your feeding program because of the fact that you all, for the most part, are getting steers with the same genetics. That's giving you a level playing fields in that area. So it's really going to see how well you're feeding and what your program looks like. And so the other thing that's different about this is that the cattle are all slick sheared, which we do not see a lot of that in Arizona in terms of our show cattle. So that's a big difference when we're going into the show ring. But I really think that slick shears show you a lot more about what's going on there in that carcass underneath that hide. In Texas, when I was on the livestock judging team, everything there was slick sheared. So it's a really great opportunity to get to have some exposure to slick sheared animals in the ring. And then the steers will be sent to a predetermined slaughter facility. So same thing, they're all going to go to the same meat packing house where the second phase of the competition will take place, and you'll have the carcass be evaluated. And there'll be a winner in the ring, a winner in the carcass division, and then an overall winner. And then you'll also participate in a rate of gain contest. So again, this is a really neat project that highlights a lot of things that the industry does. Let me see.
So just a quick question on the slick sheared. That's basically the show cow or show steer basically can hide some of their potential flaws by not being slick sheared.
Yeah. So the thing that's interesting, and I'm not saying this happens with everybody, but sometimes with that hair, you can fluff that hair up to make it look like your steer might have a little bit more rib shape, or I can, cut that hair, groom that hair to where it looks like my steer's a little bit leveler over his top, a little bit squarer. And so when you're slick sheared, you don't really have anything to mold because,
Everything
yeah,
comes out.
exactly. Yeah. It's what the naked eye sees. It's kind of like a good example that I always use when I was judging is just like me, when I put my makeup on, I'm able to hide just a few little things. And so that's kind of like a show steer with some hairs. You're able to hide a few things, but when you're not wearing any makeup, you might see a blemish here or there. And that's kind of like the slick shear. Again, that's just a way I've always thought about it.
And then there was one quick question. Do you slick shear for Liberty and Freedom or sailor shows?
No, you would not slick shear for any sailor shows. So this would just be for this production class. A lot of production classes you're gonna slick shear for, but your traditional like show circuits, no, you won't slick shear.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So then hitting that last question about some state opportunities. So there's not one listed on here because we haven't created one yet because we haven't had a lot of interest, but us as a state 4-H, we're looking to create a meat judging contest like we have at Arizona Nationals, a livestock judging contest. We're hoping in the next year to create a state level meat judging contest because those contests will then take you to compete at national 4-H contests like Western National Roundup, the North American International Livestock Expo in Louisville. And then for those of you that are in FFA, there's also a great opportunity for you to compete at CED Day. And then a lot of skillathons have a meat judging component. So if you're interested in judging at the state level, we do have a state level skillathon that's at Arizona Nationals in December. That is a qualifying event to go to the 2 national contests that I previously talked about. And in that skillathon, there are multiple divisions like an equipment, a breed ID, but there is also a meat judging component of it. So there's a great time that you'd be able to use those skills at a state level. And then finally, there are college meat judging teams. So I've known a few people who have gone to college on a meat judging scholarship. So if you're really passionate about it, let your 4-H leader know, not only your leader, but your agent or staff person. Let them know that you're interested and to reach out to me and we can start building our meat judging program. I think that would be really exciting. But here are just some examples that you can use it. Again, if you're interested in meat judging, I'd say sign up for the Skillathon at Arizona Nationals, and it's a great way to get exposed. And then finally, don't forget that this goes into your record book as a state activity. If you've been on multiple of these Ag at Home series calls, it's a great way to put some state activities into your record book.
So if somebody didn't have a ton of experience, but they wanted to just get experience, would the Arizona National one be kind of scary?
I would say no, because the Skillathon is broken into so many components that meat judging is just one of them. So it's a great way to introduce yourself to meat judging because you might not know anything about meat judging, but you do know a lot about equipment, or you know about feed ID or breed identification or different things like that. So it's a great way just to see what a meat judging contest would look like in a really small snapshot. And because it's here in our backyard, not everybody gets the chance to go to a national livestock show and get to compete in contests like that. So I always urge people that if you can, and especially if you live in Maricopa County, Arizona Nationals is always a great opportunity to kind of introduce yourself to those programs.
Okay, and somebody asked how to contact you, and I put your email in the chat box. Ashley, right? Do you want to share the evaluation again? And do we have other questions? Do we have other questions from anybody? So I know that I noticed that Liz and Kaylee have one more to attend, and they'll get after this one, and they'll get a shirt. And we've got a couple on here that already will be getting shirts. So just keep that in mind if you're close. I just noticed from that. And if you've used different emails, So if you've used multiple emails, you need to let me know that, because we look at the registrations and sort by people and emails and stuff. So Ashley Wright put the link to the Qualtrics, the evaluation in there. And thank you too for coming, everybody. Last questions for Ashley, Jeff, or Sample? I learned stuff. I was actually kind of impressed that I actually knew some of the stuff. As a horse person, there's a lot difference when you have judging on the rail in horses and judging on the rail in carcasses.
I know. I even took down a note that was like crazy to me and easy to remember, that white-faced lambs will have more fat than black-faced lambs. I thought that's neat, and that's going to be really helpful when even judging them live. So I'm like, thank you, Sam.
All right. Well, then I see no other questions. So please go ahead and fill. Oh, okay. Well, send that stuff to me via email, Josephine, because once this is gone, you're all set. You've got your t-shirt. So, but anyway, thank you so much for joining us for Meet's Carcass Judging. And we have on the agenda next, we may have to make a little switch. We'll see, but you'll see it on the website. May 6th is the date, I think, right? Is that right, Ashley? Right? I had it up here.
Yes, May 6th.
Okay, perfect. So we'll either be doing dairy or we might be flipping schedule a little bit because we have some conflicts, but we'll work that out. So May 6th.